The EU offers up a revised nuclear deal. But Tehran is skeptical. Can a new accord prevent the U.S. from taking unilateral action? And has Iran's nuclear development already come too far? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Iran's nuclear program. A couple of weeks ago, Iran told the UN it had begun enriching uranium up to 20% using new, more sophisticated centrifuges at an underground facility. Now, the announcement again set off alarm bells, so the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs sprang into action. In an op-ed in the Financial Times, Josep Borrell announced he'd submitted a new plan for a nuclear accord, one that couldn't include a better compromise. And with that promise came assurances. He wrote, "We know that in Tehran there are significant reservations over fully implementing a deal after the negative experience of recent years. The deal on the table reflects the commitment of President Joe Biden and U.S. assurances in this regard. As a result, the deal is better protected from potential unilateral moves to undermine it." So the deal may represent Biden's commitment, but in the U.S., there's no telling if Biden will actually stay in office beyond his first term. A recent Gallup poll set his approval rating at just 38%. So what would happen to this deal if Republicans take back the White House in a little over 2 years' time? Well, the former vice president, who has his eye on the top job, has been very clear about what he would do.
And now President Biden and his administration are threatening to unravel all the progress we made in marginalizing the tyrannical regime in Tehran. Today, we call on the Biden administration to immediately withdraw from all nuclear negotiations with Tehran.
So while prominent Republicans are holding their hard line against any deal with Iran, the EU insists its new proposal will protect against the U.S. unilateralism that derailed the JCPOA back in 2018. But Iran's chief negotiator says his government has a few ideas of its own. Following recent talks in Vienna, Ali Bagheri Khani tweeted, "We shared our proposed ideas to pave the way for a swift conclusion of Vienna negotiations, which were aimed at fixing the damaging, complicated situation caused by the U.S. unilateral and unlawful withdrawal." Now, we are still waiting for the specifics of the EU's new proposal, but how much room is there for real compromise? And has Iran's nuclear development since the U.S. withdrew from the JCPOA, has it passed that proverbial point of no return? Here now to debate that are from the Iranian capital, Hassan Ahmadian. He's an assistant professor of Middle East Studies at the University of Tehran. From Berlin, Fathollah-Nejad. He is an Iran expert at the American University of Beirut and the author of Iran in an Emerging New World Order, From Ahmadinejad to Rouhani. And finally, Negar Mortazavi joins us from Washington, D.C. She's a journalist, political analyst, and host of the Iran podcast. Thanks all so much for being with us. Let me start in Tehran. Hassan Ahmadian, it seems some in Iran suspect this new proposal to be really just a repackaging of old material with an added element of pressure on it. So what new can even be offered at this point? What other compromises could be made that haven't been offered already?
Hello. I think, basically, reflecting on the debates here, the Iranians see that majority of, strategists see that the main compromises have been already done back in 2015, and restoring the deal should be basically the main issue here. But they also want guarantees. And that, I think, is the main lingering issue for now. So I don't see much to be offered in addition to what has already been agreed upon, beside the guarantees. And that has been the issue that the two parties, specifically around the United States, have not seen any middle ground to agree on this issue, this specific issue. So I think the main package, the proposal, the European proposal, should have to do with this issue, and the Iranian reflection on it, I think, is also related to this issue. But so far, we don't know specifically what basically the proposal is about.
But is the feeling in Tehran either still, either go back to the conditions of 2015 or nothing?
Yeah, of course, that's the main issue. I mean, the Iranians basically call it the negotiations for the restoration of the 2015 deal and lifting of the oppressive sanctions. That's the term that is used here. That's the main theme here. So all the negotiations, according to Iranian officials, should focus on what has already been agreed on, and that the United States should, because it was the violating party in 2015 under President Trump, it should also provide guarantees that it will not do that again in the future.
Right. Negar, I mean, as for those guarantees, how can the EU actually give assurances that a unilateral U.S. move won't derail this new nuclear deal, should whatever these conditions are now being proposed pass? Where are the real guarantees that the U.S. can't do what it did back in 2018?
Well, Andrea, there are no absolute guarantees because of the way the system, the democracy here in the U.S. is set up. And essentially, if there was any continuity in U.S. foreign policy, even with the change of parties, with President Trump, we realized that all of that continuity could also be cut. So there's no absolute guarantee, but I also think that is to some extent understood in Tehran. So what I think the two sides should be doing as far as bridging this gap, and hopefully with the help of the European Union, is try to arrive at a midpoint where there isn't a unicorn absolute guarantee provided that Joe Biden can offer. But I think there are creative ways that also with the help of EU ensuring economic benefits, even in the case of another U.S. unilateral move, or also upfront guarantees in a way that would compensate, saying in the case that such a move happens again, that it would sort of offset. But I think both sides need to make more of a political decision rather than a technical decision to arrive at this midpoint and bridge the existing gap.
It's interesting, Negar, because Josep Borrell says, the harsh sanctions approach has failed, and now joint responsibility needs to be taken to avert what he's saying could be a nuclear crisis. The problem is the U.S. does not think those harsh sanctions are failing. In fact, they think they are effective.
Well, I think, yeah, and that's the surprise here, because I'm actually not quite sure what the long-term strategy of the Biden administration is. We saw candidate Biden, his senior officials under President Trump criticize President Trump for doing this exact same policy, for putting pressure and sanctions, assuming that it would bring back results, and also promising that they would make a U-turn on whatever the Trump policy was. But I guess once entering the White House and, the administration, they have been afraid of the political consequences, or let's say the backlash that they actually witnessed under the Obama-Biden administration when a deal was made with Iran. So I think it's a complicated situation. They're caught between a domestic backlash that they're afraid of facing and also a longer-term international conflict that is brewing with the lack of diplomacy with Iran.
Right. Ali, 11 months, 8 meetings in Vienna, ending in really no progress. And then in June, we saw Iran actually censured by the IAEA for failing to explain some uranium particles that they detected at various locations. Looking back, though, I want to look back at that censure itself now. We had 30 out of 35 IAEA members approving it, while China and Russia rejected it. India, Pakistan, and Libya abstained. How much does that actually indicate about how empowered Iran might feel, knowing that, no matter what, it, in a sense, has some powerful allies that will protect its interests in the IAEA?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure if those powerful allies going to step in at every occasion that Iran would then want to step in. As you might know, there is also some concerns in Tehran over the role that Russia has played during the JCPOA process. And as you know, the Russians have tried to derail the talks right after their invasion of Ukraine. But this IAEA Board of Governors resolution has indeed been critical vis-à-vis Iran. But nevertheless, I don't see any major consequences from that, that IAEA decision. Iran is continuing to pursue its nuclear escalation strategy that it has started in response to Trump's maximum pressure strategy. And so this is, it's trying to elevate its bargaining leverage. Mm-hmm. And if I may inject on the question that you posed just before, I doubt that the Biden administration is thinking that sanctions is working. I mean, they have repeated numerously that they strongly believe that Trump's maximum pressure sanctions on Iran have been counterproductive.
Right, but it's the Republicans in Congress that are going to fight to continue with the sanctions.
This is true. Yes, precisely. This is what I was going to say, because now more recently, Biden administration officials have, more talked about imposing sanctions, not least because of domestic pressure from the Republicans, but also because of Iran's strategy of nuclear escalation. And what is important to understand, I think, since my colleague from Tehran has talked about Iranian strategists, it's clear that Iran's strategy is very much based on the perception of weakness by the West. And if you see that the US and EU officials have numerously, despite numerous Iranian actions that may have been considered counterproductive, said that they are still very much interested to return to the deal.
You know what, though, Ali, I have to mention that you had actually said that Iran going nuclear would even have negative ramifications for partners, including China and Russia. What do you mean by how would the ramifications really be so negative for China and Russia?
Well, this statement is, first of all, very true before the invasion of, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, because Russia is also facing Western sanctions. So Russian behavior may be changing now. But what I meant by that is that neither Russia nor China are interested to see an emboldened Iran that has nuclear weapons, because this would not allow the continuation of the nature of bilateral relationships, be it between China and Iran or between Russia and Iran, that is characterized by an asymmetry of power to the detriment of Tehran. So, of course, a nuclear Iran may be more emboldened, but then again, a nuclear Iran has also a lot of negative consequences that also have to be taken into account.
Okay, let me ask Hassan if you agree on that point, Russia and China.
Well, I think non-proliferation is not only a U.S. policy, it's a P5 policy, a UN policy. So I think Russia, China, and other members of the Security Council are against any new country going nuclear, building its own nuclear arsenal. So that's clear, but it's not Iran did not really cross to that direction its previous policy. It did not transform its strategy of nuclear pressure into going weaponization of its nuclear program. I think it has been very vocal on using this file because it's the main bargaining chip it had vis-a-vis the United States that have all the options, as it says, on the table that include the military option. They have the main, their main option is the nuclear, within the nuclear file. So they have been piling pressure vis-a-vis the United States that is using the maximum pressure. And touching upon what has been discussed, I think though the Biden administration has been critical to Trump's maximum pressure and its sanctions campaign on Iran, it had really it has been enforcing the same strategy, didn't change it. It has added basically to the already existing sanctions on Iran. So the maximum pressure campaign is in full force under Biden, just as it was under Trump. That's why the Iranians don't see that much of a trust in this new administration. They didn't see it in the past year, and I think they won't see it in the future as well. That's why they are focusing on the issue of guarantees this time.
Hassan, I have to ask you something because it's fundamental. While those in the West believe Iran wants to build a nuclear weapon, some in the West, I should say, Iran has always said that is not what it wants, and it's against Islam itself to build nuclear weapons. So explain why there is this absolute fear that Iran is not only building a nuclear weapon, but that some believe wants to use a nuclear weapon against its enemies as well.
Well, that's different perceptions. Within Iran, the highest authority has issued a fatwa, that is a religious ruling, saying that it's forbidden in our religion to build a nuclear weapon. The Western parties do not trust Iran. But the irony is that they have ruined, the United States has ruined the main mechanism that would bar Iran from building a nuclear weapon, from developing its nuclear program. That happened in 2018 with the U.S. withdrawal from the JCPOA. Actually, I haven't seen many experts or any expert basically debating or opposing the notion that the JCPOA has put limits on Iran's nuclear program and put it under severe IAEA verification mechanisms that has been unprecedented in the history of nonproliferation worldwide. So it basically stopped Iran from moving to that direction, even if it had decided to do so.
Iran's nuclear chief, Mohammad Eslami, has said that Iran has the technical means to produce an atomic bomb, but that Iran has no intention of doing so. Has Iran's nuclear program, though, come too far already? The knowledge it's gained, since Trump withdrew from the JCPOA can't be taken back. So is it in some senses too late?
I agree that the JCPOA was the best vehicle or the limit to put on limit and monitoring and verification to put on this nuclear program, the world's most extensive monitoring system on any nuclear program, to ensure that instead of us speculating that there would be a UN watchdog monitoring this program to ensure that it doesn't break through and move from a civilian into a weapons program. Now, it hasn't happened yet. Iran is trying to, in a way, escalate to gain leverage, I think is what they're seeing on their side. By this escalation, they're trying to gain leverage when it comes to the negotiations. But it's so far, I think they're pushing the limits to a point that is not of a no return. And I don't think while this supreme leader at least is alive, which would be, while he is supreme leader, that fatwa would be reneged. So the religious decree, essentially, or the fatwa against the production of nuclear weapons will stay until this supreme leader is in power and alive. But after that, I can't guarantee, because there could always be fatwas over fatwas. So that's one issue, the political, religious view of that in Tehran. But also when it comes to actual practice, the way to monitor and ensure the program doesn't move from civilian to weapons is to have these monitorings in place. And that was called the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which unfortunately hasn't been revived yet.
It's interesting. I mean, you've actually made the point. The U.S. can change its policy, and technically so can Iran. This fatwa can be overruled. Hopefully that won't be the case, but yeah, both sides can have issues with actually dramatically changing their foreign policy. But you know what? We're down to our last few minutes. So, Ali, the EU says there's this new proposal. It couldn't be a better compromise. So, I mean, if this fails, is it game over?
There is high doubt whether the European Union can effectively step in to help provide some kind of guarantees for the Iranians to return to the deal. So the main strategic decision going to still remain in both Washington and in Tehran. And of course, the EU can be helpful here. But I'm not sure if we are at the end of the road. So what we've seen over this past year or so We've seen this very fragile situation where Iran has been driving up its bargaining leverage through its nuclear program, but also some of its actions in the region. And what the Iranian officials have seen as a reaction from the West was kind of lukewarm. Both Washington and the European Union have time and again reiterated their willingness to return to the deal. So this is so as long as this perception in Tehran exists about an alleged Western weakness and the lack of a plan B that could be pursued vis-a-vis Iran, because after all, the nuclear issue is not the most important issue when it comes to the antagonism between the United States and Iran, I don't see major changes happening.
Hassan, I want to get your take on that as well.
Well, I think, taking into account the alternative, which is escalation and not so beautiful picture of a future without the JCPOA, I think all parties are eyeing the revival of the JCPOA. Differences have been there. Of course, there have been always talks on the limit, the time limit that the parties are facing. I mean, a year ago, some parties to the JCPOA have been talked about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month max to revive the JCPOA, or otherwise it won't worth it. So I think I don't buy that. I think basically diplomacy doesn't have limits. Time can be extended, provided that there's a political will to go to that direction. So I think all parties have shown that they want the deal revived. But of course, there are different strategies, and it can take time to bridge differences.
Okay, Negar, that's go ahead, Ali. Yeah.
I think also in terms of Tehran decision-making that Hassan has talked about, I think it is important to observe whether we're going to see the prevalence of economic urgency now in Tehran, despite this widening economic crisis in the country. So far from the new Raisi administration, we've seen some kind of deprioritization of the economy, which is, of course, a continuity over much of the history of the Islamic Republic. But, there has been the desire in the Raisi administration to claim political victory and to strike a better deal than the Rouhani administration. And this is why, a lot of observers are asking why there is no economic urgency now to go back to the deal, and pointing to other priorities that the current administration at this point of time at least may have.
Negar, if you can comment on that economic urgency issue, because we've seen sanctions fail in so many different respects. Some say we're witnessing it right now with the sanctions that are on Russia, actually building strength in Russia in a sense of unity against the West, and that is, in a sense, what the West does to Iran. Instead of, yes, it might be hurting the economy, but it strengthens Iran's resolve in some way. Do you think there's a sense of economic urgency or no?
Well, there is, from the viewpoint of the population. Research after research has shown that sanctions do actually weaken the economy, but the burden is put on the shoulder of the population, the average person, the average Iranian, working class, middle class, and not necessarily every aspect of the government or the regime, as the sanctioning party would like to put that pressure. But there is a sense of economic urgency in Iran, and that's why I think when we talk about both sides wanting the deal, the Iranians definitely want economic benefits, and it's still worth it for them. I think at this point, even the economic benefits, the foreign reserve that they would have access to, from the viewpoint of the U.S., they would also be resolving a problem and just get it out of the way, because the Joe Biden administration has so many domestic and international issues, especially with Russia's attack on Ukraine now, that this is just one extra problem that they can just resolve and put it aside and deal with the other issues that they're dealing with. But it's also complicated as we're getting closer to the midterm elections here in the U.S.
Hassan, 1 minute, quick final thoughts.
Well, I think basically the economic pressure is there, and the Iranians are under pressure. But one of the biggest mistakes that I think the Biden administration has done is building on that pressure and trying to extract more concessions based on it. The political culture and the strategic culture of Iran has shown time and again that pressure would not bring Iran to basically concessions to other parties, pressurizing parties. If anything, it can be counterproductive, leading Iran to put try to counter-pressure the party that is pressurizing it. In this case, Iran is up in the ante within the nuclear file, trying to put more pressure on the United States, saying that the maximum pressure will only lead Iran to basically elevate and enhance its nuclear advancements within the country.
Hassan Ahmadian, you are going to have the final word. We are completely out of time for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank Ali Fathollah-Nejad and Negar Mortazavi as well for joining us on this edition of the Newsmakers. Our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey, and we'll see you next time.